morning, church. Good morning to any visitors that are with us. Certainly a warm welcome to everyone that is here. Thank you very much, Adrian, for the song leading into this. Thank you that you sang all 4 verses. Love that song. And thank you, Gerald, for the scripture reading, which was Genesis 1:1 through 10, in the beginning. I've been wanting to present a lesson like this for, almost decades, really. But really, every time we get far more educated and polished speakers in, they always get these kinds of topics. Because they're, to simply put, more educated and polished than what I am. And so when Joseph asked me, would I mind presenting on this particular topic, I was like, let me think about yes. So I'm so glad I've had the opportunity to do that. For those of you who followed on in the scripture reading, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, put your bookmarks in Romans chapter 1 and verse 1. And then put your Bibles next to you, because how do you talk about life and matter demanding a maker using the Bible? You can't. The Bible is not a textbook. It's not a science book. In the educated or / academic way of thinking, especially in today's world, the Bible is written for people who use the evidences that we're about to look at to come to a knowledge and an understanding of the living God that people like us claim is out there. So I've really tried my best in putting the material that I've used for this lesson together. I've really tried my best in actually going to the source of a lot of the information that was provided. So the first thing I want to do is give Eric Lyons and Carl Butt a bit of credit, because the foundation of this lesson and a lot of the lessons to come will be based off their work and their framework. So the first question to ask in Life Demands a Life Giver is, how can you know? How can you know? And I think even before that, I want to ask the question, can you know? And I don't mean can you know and like, are you able to know? I mean, are you willing to know? So a more personal question, can you know? Will you know? Are you willing to accept what is provided to you in terms of information and evidence? And I've kind of decided to treat this a little bit like a courtroom where God is there and the atheist is there and the Christian is there, and Lady Justice is perhaps blind, although there were certainly very interesting images when I just asked for, Lady Justice, and lots of them with holes in the blindfold. But I hope that we can all just look at this objectively. And obviously, I cannot claim to be perfectly objective. I mean, I'm here, I'm teaching in a church, quote-unquote, church building to a majority bunch of believers. But I've tried to be objective as possible. I've tried to go directly to sources, as you will see throughout. And so, as we look at Lady Justice and the balance of the scales, if you will, I'd like to propose that there's particularly 3 kinds of people in this world. You have those that won't believe in God. Doesn't matter what you do. If you actually provided a cut from God's cloth, if you will, and put it in front of them, the shining, magic, glowing specimen, which is impossible. But if you could do that, they still would just not believe. There just is no God. The world is flat. There is no gravity. Whatever else you want to come up with, I've just decided to not believe in God, point blank, period. You have those kinds of people in the world. And then you have the kinds of people that maybe this quote belonged to. And I don't mean any offense, but in keeping with the spirit of trying to keep all the credits where they're due, this person, Renee, if I pronounced that right, said, you don't have to see it to believe it and you will see it. So airy-fairy, there's a God, no matter what. I don't care what the atheist says. I don't care what the Christian says. There's a God, and if you can't see it, you just don't want to believe it, and that's that. I don't need evidence. I don't need anything. I'm just going to walk through life because there's a God. And kind of the same way as if you say to yourself, well, I don't care what color they tell me that thing is. It's white. I don't even have to see it. I'm not removing the blindfold that I had in when I walked off this building and have no clue what color it actually is. It just is white. You've had a lucky guess. You got onto the truth. Good luck. But you have no evidence on which to base that assumption that it's white, even though it is white. So you have those kinds of people in the world too. But I'm hoping that we can look at this from the perspective that you want truth. We're here, we're giving up of our time, of our money, and of our effort because we want the truth, and we want juries to look at this and provide a verdict where hopefully we can see whether or not life demands a life giver, and perhaps whether or not matter demands a maker. Now, before I go on, just a quick disclaimer. I kind of used that "I won't believe in God" thing way out of context. That actually comes from the cover of a book by Nick Cady, who actually has 9 points he did a survey on what are the toughest things to convince Christians, what are the toughest things to convince atheists, let's rephrase it. What are the 9 toughest things to convince people to become Christians? And so it's actually a book on the 9 common barriers to embracing Christianity. But I couldn't really find anything else for the previous slide, so I just butchered that a little bit. Apologies. All right, so going back to the lesson. How can you know? Well, to go to talking about courts of law, in the Australian Law Reform Commission.gov.au, LRC.gov.au, so on the government website, I pulled up a document that was talking about, what is law in Australia, and I pulled up this extract from the principle talking about common law, so section 11 of that document. And I want to highlight a few passages, or not Bible passages from that text. So, in criminal trials, the prosecution bears the burden of proof. It's up to the prosecutor to prove his case, all right? Because, and this has kind of been, you'll hear this quite a bit if you look at any law thing. I saw this a number of times, the golden thread of English criminal law. In other words, someone is innocent until proven guilty, and the prosecutor bears that burden of proof. In 11.2, this principle is related to the principle that guilt must be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. And in the fine print there, which I have to go close to read, in Australia, it is logically distinct from the requirement of the prosecution must... let's start that again. The presumption of innocence has not generally been regarded in Australia as logically distinct from the requirement that the prosecution must prove the guilt of the accused person beyond a reasonable doubt. So in simple language, there's little difference logically in Australia that proving someone's innocence must be beyond a reasonable doubt from that top point, which is innocent till proved guilty. If we go to an education, an Australian endorsed education program called Rule of Law, and there's all there about us and their websites, etc. They have a module on what is reasonable doubt, what is meant by reasonable doubt. And they say in there, clearly not every doubt is reasonable. In our system, the prosecution is not required to prove the guilt of the accused beyond any possible doubt, raising the standard of proof to the level that would make it nearly impossible to secure a conviction and would prevent society from being able to police criminal behavior. So, reasonable doubt. Not every possible doubt, just every reasonable doubt. And Senior Crown Prosecutor Marky Tadashi, AMQM, so AM apparently means his order of the, he's a member of the Order of Australia, and QC means he belongs to an association called the Queen's Council. Now, the QC apparently is you have to serve a certain amount of time as a lawyer, you have to serve a certain amount of time as community service in lawyer or pro bono work. You have to also be recognized as someone who teaches upcoming lawyers or mentors. So he's someone who's been around the traps and is quite recognized. And he was asked in this education program, there's a video of him, that's a picture of him, and he was asked, well, how do you define reasonable doubt? And he uses the example of, can you be sure that this building will be here tomorrow? Now, I'm assuming you understand he wasn't in this building when he was talking about that, but can I be certain that this building will still be standing tomorrow? And how much money would you bet that this building would be standing tomorrow? And now, I'm not promoting an addiction to gambling. I'm just saying that I think it's safe as houses, as the expression goes, that this building will be here tomorrow? So he says, to answer that question, that demonstrates to you the difference between mathematical certainty or scientific certainty and beyond a reasonable doubt. You're using your common sense, you're using your knowledge of building structure, you're using your knowledge of the state of the world today, that there's unlikely to be a nuclear war overnight. You're using your knowledge of the geological stability of the eastern seaboard of Australia, all right, beyond a reasonable doubt. So yes, this building, or he was obviously speaking in the buildings, in the building that he was in over east when he was being interviewed, and he says, well, yes, a stray nuclear rocket or rocket could hit this building tonight. Yes, there could be an earthquake tonight. Yes, the city could just uprise and decide this building needs to go tonight. So there is no mathematical or scientific certainty that this building will be here tomorrow, but it is beyond a reasonable doubt because of our knowledge, because of our common sense, as he says, using both of those phrases, that this building will be here tomorrow. One cannot, talking about mathematical certainty or scientific certainty, one cannot look into a microscope or a telescope and see God. Similarly, one cannot hear, touch, or feel God. And just to acknowledge the fact that I'm probably not completely objective, I believe I am, to be honest, but, I'll be honest, or I'll give credit to that comment. I believe I've not physically heard or felt Jesus or God in my life, but I do believe in my life, after having accepted him, I've seen and felt him working in me, and in the decisions that happen to me and around me and for me, I see his hand. So let's stick with mathematical and scientifically. One cannot physically hear, touch, or feel God. One cannot prove scientifically, elementally, or atomically the existence of God. And so, how can one know that God exists? All right, so with all of that in mind, how can you know that God exists? Are you willing to perhaps know that God exists? How would a supercomputer prove it had a creator? How would a supercomputer prove it had a creator? Well, I thought I'd ask one. How were you created? Yes, I am the creation of OpenAI, a research organization focused on artificial intelligence. I am based on the GPT 3.5 architecture, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer 3.5. My underlying technology involves machine learning and natural language processing, allowing me to understand and generate human-like text based on the input I receive. How would you prove that? Proving my nature as a creation of OpenAI involves providing information about OpenAI and the development of GPT 3.5 model. OpenAI is a well-known research organization in the field of artificial intelligence, and they have publicly acknowledged the creation of models like mine. However, I don't have the ability to provide real-time information or updates beyond my last training cutoff in January 2022. To verify my origin, you may refer to OpenAI's official statements, publications, or contact OpenAI directly for the most up-to-date information on the project and models. And I thought to myself, oh my word, that's like someone trying to explain God. Like, nothing in this world says, here's a physical God, but if we go and look at some perhaps instruction manuals that was publicly available, we might recognize that there is a creator, that there is a designer. But anyways, let's stick with the supercomputer for now. Can you prove the existence of your creator? I don't have the ability to provide direct proof of the existence of my creator or the individuals involved in developing me. However, information about OpenAI, the organization responsible for my creation, is publicly available. You can find information about OpenAI, its mission, and its team members on the official website, centralnorthchurchofchrist.com. No, just kidding. In press releases, in various publications related to artificial intelligence research. If you have specific questions or concerns, reach out to the OpenAI directory, and you'll have the most reliable way to obtain information. Did you evolve from nothing? I did not evolve in the biological sense. I am a product of human-designed technology. My development involved the work of engineers and researchers at OpenAI who designed and trained me using a process called supervised learning. I don't have consciousness, self-awareness, or personal history. Instead, I generate responses based on patterns and information present in the data in which I was trained. You see, a supercomputer, a laptop, a AI cannot from within itself prove its creators, cannot prove that which is external to it. I think you see where I'm going with this. And so how can you know that God does not exist? Well, it is impossible to prove that God does not exist. You cannot prove that God does not exist, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. But considering, the burden of proof is supposed to lie with the prosecutor, and in essence what we're doing most of the time in our lives, for the majority of people in this audience before me, and I'm assuming most of the majority of the people that will be streaming this or are streaming this, God is the defendant. We're kind of defending the presence of God, the fact that there is a God. But considering that the burden of proof is supposed to lie on the prosecution to prove that God does not exist, I want to kind of keep the burden of proof upon me. I kind of want to play the prosecutor, if you will. John Clayton said, so John Clayton was a high school physicist who was an atheist and became a Christian and put out, he's actually just updated it, I noticed when I was preparing for this study, but he'd done one 20 years ago, and there's now a new one that he's got out. He did a series of lessons called Does God Exist? And in the original, not in the, because I did look at the first 3 episodes of his new one, but in the original one, in his first lesson, he says, I merely ask you to believe that you exist. He says, that's the only premise I want from you. He says, I don't need you to know your Bible. I don't need you to care about the Bible just yet. In fact, he actually goes on quite a lot about how it used to irritate him as an atheist that Christians would go up to him and quote scripture to prove to him that God exists. Like, well, if God doesn't exist to me, your Bible doesn't exist to me. So why do you keep using that? So he just says, the only thing I do want you to accept is the fact that you exist. If you don't believe you exist, then, well, I really can't do too much more for you. And because the reason he says that is because if you exist, matter exists. And if matter exists, well, where did it come from? Where did matter come from? My particular lesson, the first part of this 4-part series, as Brother Adrian alluded to, is matter has a maker, and life demands a life giver. So if there's matter, where did it come from? Now, that's a lot of reading, which you can read in your own time. I had planned to read this, but looking at the time, I'm not going to. I'm going to basically summarize it, and it's been up there for a while, so if you've got your videos or you go back and stream it, you can pause it and read it. And there's the source at the bottom from Open College in the UK. They had their modules online. And it talks about the laws of cause and effect. And pretty much the laws of cause and effect state that for every effect, there is an equal cause to it. That's the very short version of everything you see on the screen there. And this is directly based on Newton's 3 laws. All right, on Newton's 3 laws. So Newton's first law is the law of inertia. And that states if a body is at rest or moving at a constant speed in a straight line, it will remain at rest or keep moving in a straight line at a constant speed unless it is acted upon by a force. In fact, in classical Newtonian mechanics, there is no important distinction between whether an object is stationary or moving, is what the rest of that sentence says. And you see that he says that there's whether it's stationary or moving, unless a force acts upon it, it's going to keep doing that at exactly the same rate. And it is because of this that, hey, we discovered things like friction, because he worked that out, and then he worked out, but if you do push a ball along a table, the ball eventually stops if the table is perfectly level, and that's because there's a force acting on it. That force is called friction. So the law of inertia. Objects want to remain in the state of energy in which they're at. We're going to come to that a little bit later, sort of byproduct of that first law. Newton's second law is a quantitative description of the change that a force can produce on the motion of a body. And it states that the time rate of change of the momentum of a body is equal in both magnitude and direction to the force imposed on it. The momentum of the body is equal to the product of its mass and its velocity. Momentum is like velocity, and velocity is a vector having both magnitude and direction, is what's missing there. Okay, so the short version of that is, if I drop my barbell onto the floor and all of a sudden a crack splits down the building up and down, no one's going to think it's because I dropped my barbell on the floor. It just doesn't have the momentum or the acceleration, or the mass, sorry, is what I was looking for, the mass or the acceleration, F equals m times a, to generate that kind of a reaction. And so there must be an earthquake or something else at play. So it's that idea that force is equal to the mass and acceleration. There must be an equal reaction. You can't have an ant pushing over this pulpit and think, or if you see the pulpit fall over, you think, oh, where's the ant that dislodged it? You know, you recognize that something of the ability to do so has done that. And this third law of action and reaction states that when two bodies interact, they apply forces to one another that are equal in magnitude and opposite in direction. Okay, I kind of sort of glazed over the third and second there. The third law also is known as the law of action and reaction, and this law is important in analyzing problems of static equilibrium, where all forces are balanced, but also applies to bodies in uniform or accelerated motion. And that highlighted part there, these forces are described as real ones, not merely bookkeeping devices. In other words, this is physical forces and they're physical actions. It's not just something that you write on paper like, oh, if a fly flies into a train, it stops the train because theoretically before something can move in an opposite direction, it has to stop. And if the fly is stopped before it can go in reverse, that means the train must have stopped because they're touching each other. That's bookkeeping. Okay, yes, it sounds great on a piece of paper, but I've never ever seen a fly stop a train in my life before. And so I realized that in real life, this is not a real thing. And so what Newton's law is stating is that these are real forces. These are real things. It's not just bookkeeping. It's not just theory. It's actuality. In New South Wales, their Year 11 science module, they have a whole module talking about cause and effect observing. And the reason why I wanted to highlight that is because this is not made up stuff. This is real stuff that we educate our kids with in a current modern day curriculum where evolution is not taught to be the theory that it is. People recognize these are laws and that they're unchanging. All right, on a slightly lighter note, who recognizes this? All right, a few of the young ones my age recognize that. All right. The first time I showed my kids this, they were like, what is it? Do you stick that in like a VCR, or do you use it to keep your Lego bricks in order, or what? So, I see some wives explaining it to their husbands. Awesome stuff. All right, so this is where you used to keep your, wait for it, telephone numbers. All right, so you would open that up, you'd push the little silver thingy, and the flap would spring up to the letter on which you had the slider thingy. And hey, everyone, in this case, I think that's on W. So everyone with the surname W would, you'd have their names and numbers in there. So yes, that's an old-fashioned flip Rolodex type thing. All right, so another easy question. Who recognizes this? No, I didn't recognize. Oh, we have some smart ones in the audience. I didn't recognize this. All right, first law of thermodynamics. That's the equation for the first law of thermodynamics. Again, a lot of fine print. I just want to concentrate on what you might struggle to read there. You might have to go back and look at the recording. So the first law of thermodynamics states that the change in internal energy of a system is equal to the work done by or to the system and the heat that flows in or out of it. All right, so I'll get to that in a moment, but pretty much first law of thermodynamics states that a system is balanced. That's the short version. All right, breaking the law. Now, it's not super clear on there, but if you ever get a copy of which I'm happy to share with anyone who wants at this presentation, like I actually looked at this seagull in that silhouette, and someone must have actually photoshopped that, because it is exactly like every little line and detail of that. No seagulls is there how that seagull is looking. So breaking the law like a boss. And you know what? That seagull, that could be real. I mean, it could hypothetically actually be real, because we know that nothing is going to stop that seagull from landing on that sign. And even if you see a really committed policeman walking up to and tabbing over the beak of that seagull a ticket for breaking the law, and that seagull goes away, nothing's going to stop it from coming back the next day and landing on that post, even though it's breaking the law. You see, it can break the law. But the thing about natural laws is that they cannot be broken. We know exactly what's going to happen next in this cartoon character. That wolf-looking like thing is going to look directly at the camera, it's going to blink twice, and then it's going to fall down, because gravity cannot be broken. It does no matter how hard you try to break the laws of nature, you cannot. You can't. You're not going to get a fine for breaking the law of gravity. You're just going to die. The laws of nature cannot be broken. Societal laws can be broken. They can be changed. They can just do whatever you want with them. But the laws of nature cannot be broken. Now, I want you to consider that when looking at Stephen Hawking's novel, and this is an actual excerpt, however you pronounce the word, from his book. So again, I didn't just copy it and paste and think, oh, well, Stephen Hawking said this. I went to go and look at it. I looked at the references I was provided. This is the page number. There it's at the top if you want it. There's the URL. You can actually go and read it. It's free with a whole bunch of watermarks over it, as you can see on the left there, half a watermark there. And on this page, understanding the laws of nature cannot be broken, understanding that Stephen Hawking is a lot smarter than what I will ever be in my life, says, where does the hydrogen come from? Answer, the Big Bang. But here's the crucial bit. The laws of nature itself, interesting that he would refer to the laws of nature, tell us that not only could the universe have popped into existence without any assistance like a proton, and have required nothing in terms of energy, but also that it is possible that nothing caused the Big Bang. Nothing. Well, that is a complete lie, according to the laws of Newton and the laws of thermodynamics. It is not possible. So I don't know what laws he's referring to, and he doesn't care to explain them, but I don't care if he explains them. Like, it's not possible. The laws of nature cannot be broken. They're not a bookkeeping exercise. They're real laws. A Trip to Infinity on Netflix, you can watch that. There's a lot to do with Einstein and his various theories. And in this A Trip to Infinity, a guy by the name of Anthony Aguirre, and as you can see there, he's a super duper smart physicist. And he really, his field is the ultra large scale of the structure of the universe. Hence, he's in this movie called Infinity, because in that particular chapter where he comes in, it's talking about the fact that space and the universe is infinite, and what does that actually mean? And he proposes, talking about the universe and its infinite largeness, that if you have an infinite amount of time, you could take an apple and you could put it inside a cube and seal the cube up. And now inside this cube is a real live apple. And there's nothing that can go in and out of this cube. And what's going to happen to that apple? Well, he says eventually it's going to decay and become old, and eventually break down, and eventually become dust, and eventually just become nothing. But what will eventually happen, given an infinite amount of time, is the fact that the particles can become an infinite amount of puzzle pieces and an infinite amount of puzzles. And eventually what will happen is, at some stage, these infinite particles will just magically relock and become a proper apple again. And that's how the universe came to be. It's it's aging, it's expanding, and we're going to infinitely eventually become nothing and dust, and eventually going to infinitely become a living, expanding, beautiful universe again when the atoms rearrange themselves into this. Well, beyond a reasonable doubt, that's going to happen. You believe if you put an apple in a container for an infinite amount of time, you want to tell me there's, beyond a reasonable doubt, there is as much chance as this building not being yet tomorrow as that apple not reorganizing itself into a fully fresh apple again? Like, that defies not only the laws of not only the first law of thermodynamics, but also the second law of thermodynamics, which we're going to look at in just a second. You believe God is eternal. The question then is, well, if you believe God is eternal, why can I not believe the universe is eternal? And that's kind of the premise on which that is based, is the fact that the universe is eternal. And so he has kind of recognized that, well, nothing can come from nothing, and so there must be another theory, and that is, okay, well, you believe God is eternal, why can't I believe the universe is eternal? And we just keep going in these cycles, because you see, he has to recognize that it goes in cycles because of the second law of thermodynamics. But ultimately, the second law of thermodynamics debunks this theory altogether. All right, unless you break this law of nature, which we know is unbreakable, unless you're writing a book and you just choose to ignore the fact that it's unbreakable. I mean, that is one option. It becomes a bookkeeping exercise. It's beyond a possible doubt. It is impossible, according to the laws of nature. It is as impossible as you dropping a brick from the roof of this building that it's going to go up. That's how impossible it is for that apple to become a whole fresh apple again, because of the law of thermodynamics. I'm not going to read that whole thing. You can read it. That is a direct quote from Britannica. So not only can you read it, you can go and look it up yourself and read it. But simply put, the second law of thermodynamics states that colder things cannot make things hotter. And that sounds daft, but it's not really if you think about it before you've proven all of this, because, well, hotter things can make cold things hotter. So why can't... no, sorry, it was the reverse way around. So just ignore that. Colder things can't make things hotter. And hotter things can't make cold things... Yeah, move on before I completely confuse myself. So colder things can't make things hotter. In other words, energy cannot be put into a system. A system moved into chaos cannot spontaneously return to its original state. An apple that has gone into a dust cannot spontaneously return to its original state. In fact, an example that the doctor uses in a couple of slides' time that I'll be showing you, because she explains this to me because it's too complicated for me without needing a little bit more dumbed down version, was she broke an egg. And she said the law of thermodynamics says that that egg can never be made whole again without a lot of work being done to it. It can't spontaneously become whole because of this idea of things moving into chaos. So it's not chaos as we just think, oh, the whole world's in chaos and leaves flying around in a storm. Chaos just means not in the ordered fashion that it was in the beginning. All right? A system moved into chaos cannot spontaneously return to its original state. If you pour milk into your coffee, the milk's not going to automatically separate itself from the coffee, from the water. Things want to be at an equal temperature. Things are looking to be at equilibrium all the time. And it kind of relates back to Newton. And it is because of the second law of thermodynamics that we even have a Big Bang theory, because scientists no longer debate the fact that this world, this universe, had to have a beginning. Because of the law of thermodynamics. If we have heat being provided by the sun, how did the sun get its heat? What's going to happen when the sun runs out of its heat? How is the sun reacting over time to the heat? And we know that the sun is getting just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit colder every moment. So scientists agree that the universe had to have a beginning and will have an end. All right, and this is the video I watched. It's written by the Science Lives Here. I forgot what the RR stands for, and it's too small for me to read there. All right, and that's Dr. Valeska Ting, and she says there is no need to panic. The world is going to end, but only in 10 to the power of 26 years. So in that many years, we can start panicking that the world will run out of energy. All right, so we're good for a while. All right, global warming and stuff, I'll let the world worry about that. But in terms of the world reaching this end state where there is no more energy, the whole universe will just become at equilibrium. In other words, nothing else can happen. There's no heat to give or extract or take or use, is about that many years. And so this brings us then to, well, life must demand a life giver. If matter demands a maker, the fact that there is all these laws for life to come from somewhere, energy to come from somewhere. In fact, even my wife and I went to watch a thing at SciTech. Well, we didn't go to watch it. We went there for the kids, and one of the shows that they had on there was the origin of life. And man, okay, I'll move on because I'm running out of time. But the short version is, in the midst of this crazy narrative, like, talk about beyond reasonable doubt and just spinning your mind out with, are you watching slapstick comedy or are you watching science? He goes on, this goes on to a progression of all this evolution and expansion and stars and energy, the incredible amounts of energy that came from who knows where. But what kick-started life was, wait for it, and I quote, proteins in the depths of the ocean that were there at the time that were designed, that was the word that was used, designed to give life when receiving light. Who designed them? I don't know. Why they used that word in the midst of this show, I don't know. But it just hit me like a ton of bricks. After all of this, these cells were designed to, sorry to say that again. Life demands a life giver. All right, again, that's a lot smaller than what I anticipated, so I apologize. But for those of you with your binoculars, that highlighted section reads, while the hypothetical process, this is really interesting. So this is a paper on abiogenesis. All right, it's from Britannica, so you can go and look it up. There's the exact URL to this exact article. And it talks about abiogenesis. So the law of biogenesis, which we're about to look at, is, so biogenesis, bio means life, genesis means beginning. We knew the Genesis part, most of us I'm sure did. Bio means life, so the beginning of life. So the law of biogenesis is talking about how life began or can begin, whereas abiogenesis is talking about how non-life can begin life. All right? So listen to this. While the hypothetical process of spontaneous generation was disproved as early as the 17th century and decisively rejected in the 19th century, abiogenesis has been neither proved nor disproved. Decisively rejected, but neither disproved nor proved. Like, that doesn't even make sense to me. Hypothetically, the hypothetical process of spontaneous generation was disproved as early as the 17th century, decisively rejected in the 19th century, but it's neither been proved nor disproved. So this is Britannica, people. This isn't the Sun or the Telegraph or what other tabloid is your tabloid of fancy. This is Britannica. And in the same paragraph, it says, decisively, like proved, decisively rejected, but neither proved nor disproved. And then it goes on to talk about the experiments by Oparin and Haldane and the Miller-Urey experiment, which never came to a conclusion, hence their theories, as you can see there. The Oparin-Haldane theory and the Miller-Urey experiment, and there's no conclusion. Like, you can go and read this, you can see if I'm making, what I'm making up, what I'm not making up, what I'm making fun of because I'm biased and I'm not objective, or whether this is real things in the real internet, quote, end quote. But they do talk about there the fact that it was decisively rejected and those experiments. So Louis Pasteur was the person in the 19th century that decisively proved, and where this ultimate rejection came from, because he proved that if he took a broth and he put it in these specially designed swan neck flasks where no life could get in, but air could still get in, the atmosphere could still act on it. I don't know how he got it right. Don't ask me. I'm not that smart. I tried to understand. I couldn't. in the time I had to prepare for this lesson, but he had designed these things where no life could get in, but air could still flow, because that was the problem in the 17th century. The 17th century, they did the same experiment, but they made the jars airtight. And so the conclusion was the experiment was rejected because they said, well, no living organism can survive without oxygen. And so the experiments were rejected. But then Louis Pasteur designed these flasks where there could be airflow and everything that's needed for life. And he put this broth in there, and hey presto, never anything living grew or came into this broth, no matter how long he kept it for. And that's the experiment that they're talking about, where it says it was decisively rejected in the 19th century. That's Louis Pasteur's work. So legally, when you cannot prove something, even though it was proved, and the same article says it was proved, so I've yet to reconcile that complete contradiction in an academic writing and publication. But let's go with the not disproved section for now and move on. Legally, if something cannot be proved, it's unfalsifiable or speculative. All right? Like, you cannot prove that there's no God. That's why there's just a speculation there's no God, because it's a theory. You can't prove it. It's impossible to prove there's no God. So it's a speculation. We're speculating that there's no God, and cannot prove the speculation beyond a reasonable doubt that there's no God. Whereas we're kind of sitting on the side where we're wanting to say, well, beyond a reasonable doubt, there has to be, whether or not you want to call it God, there has to be a designer, a life giver, a maker of matter, something outside of the universe that's powerful, big enough, omnipotent and omniscient enough to create the universe, because of all the laws that have been proven within the universe that are unbreakable. They are unbreakable. You cannot break them. So example, prove that pigs will never be able to fly. We all say, oh, when pigs fly. Why do we say that? Because we know that that's never going to happen. Well, prove to me that that's never going to happen. Well, you can't prove it's never going to happen. You cannot prove that this pulpit's never going to get up and walk out of here because it's tired of having Bible bashers like me stand before it. You cannot prove it. It's impossible. So George Walt was a staunch atheist, and he apparently wrote this article or this book, which says, when it comes to the origin of life, there are only two possibilities: creation of spontaneous generation, creation or spontaneous generation. So those are the only two possibilities. And the reason why I say supposedly is, like I said to you in the beginning, I really made every effort to go and find the original author's work and the publication. And with this guy, it was a little bit difficult because I had this, and then I had this, which is written and produced by an atheist, so for whatever credit or value that holds. But he says, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, that he went to a library and he got out that publication that was referenced, and it was highly redacted, summarized, and slightly misquoted. And if the text that he produced, which is quite extensive, and again, there's all the links and the URLs, so you can go and do all of this yourself if you feel the need to. If what he wrote is the truth, then I could see how people would come to that conclusion and draw the quote that they drew. But even in the original, so I thought, well, irrespective, I don't care. Let's go worst case scenario, and that's not what the guy said. I mean, not that it matters what he said anyway. Who's George Walt compared to the Isaac Newtons and Louis Pasteur's of the world and laws of thermodynamics? None of that really matters who George Walt is. But let's look at what this guy, who was a laureate prize winner, by the way, what he did actually have to say in the quote-unquote worst case scenario. So he says in the extract that was produced by this atheist of the document that was originally quoted, he says, that, however, is not the end of the matter. Our present concept of the origin of life leads us to the position that in a universe composed as ours, life inevitably arises wherever conditions permit. Well, that's proven false. So how he could say that, I don't know. Louis Pasteur proved that false. He gave life the conditions that it needed, and life never came. And hence, Britannica and all other sources of material, educational, academic sources say that Louis Pasteur proved life can only come from life. So why he decides that he can, on paper, say, without any proof, that it just arises wherever the conditions permit, well, that goes against the experiments that are repeatable and producible today. So this is, take from that what you will. We look upon life as a part of the order of nature. It does not emerge immediately with the establishment of that order. Long ages must pass before it appears, yet given enough time, it is an inevitable consequence of that order. Well, that's false. That defies the laws of thermodynamics. It does not happen. It does not spontaneously regenerate. So again, how does this educated, far more educated than myself, person make that kind of a statement? What liberality is that? And I suppose you could go into philosophical arguments, like how could we as a society allow things like this to go in there? How can the publishers of the Britannica allow a completely contradictory statement to be within 3 lines of each other? Like, it's not paragraphs apart. You don't have to read the whole thing and then understand it and study it and then, oh, wait a minute, that first line disagreed with that 100th line. They're 2 lines from each other. I'm not going to carry on because I'm seriously running out of time and I don't want to go past what I'm comfortably allowed to do. So beyond reasonable doubt. And I suppose as the jury, you need to look at these evidences, at these laws, at these facts, and decide what is beyond a reasonable doubt. Law of cause and effect, law of thermodynamics, first law, second law of thermodynamics, the law of biogenesis, all of which have been proven as laws and are repeatable experiments that can be seen, versus the theory of evolution, the theory, if you can even call it that, of abiogenesis, and the theory of atoms organizing themselves, again, if you can even call it a theory considering what we've looked at. So in my opinion, it is beyond a reasonable doubt that there must be something greater and higher that is out there. And because of the time, I'm going to skip reading Romans 1:18 through 25. But basically what it says is that if you go outside and you look at creation, you look at the order of things, the way in which we receive our energy, our life, the way the earth operates, the solar systems, the seasons, the order and the magnitude of the order of everything from the atom to the solar system, there had to be something that created it, that began it, that started it, that kicked it off. And I'd suggest to you, in my opinion, beyond a reasonable doubt, that is a super being that is outside of the system. Like a supercomputer cannot from within itself prove itself. It's got to show you something from outside of itself. This world cannot from within itself prove the existence of the one that created it. We have publicly, and are very easily available, especially in today's world, writings on this creator and on this being. And if you would like further study on that, I encourage you to reach out to us in whatever platform that is available to you. Please reach out to us and you can learn more about this super being, this super creator, this life giver, this maker. Thank you very much. Will you please stand as we have our closing hymn?